one of the things that I tell my students, in contrast to YOLO, you don't have a sense when you're 20, 25, I think even 30, of how much time you really have to make an impact and do good things.
Welcome to the Sharing Passion and Purpose podcast, a weekly podcast providing career and creative inspiration to help you build a purpose-filled life. If you're interested in tapping into your creative potential, pursuing a career with passion, and building on your biggest and best resource, yourself, please join me on this path. I'm your host, Nancy Moore, and I want you to know that I'm on this journey with you. So let's get started. I am so fortunate to call my next guest a friend and a sorority sister. Byrne Allen, also known as Bob, is somebody who I met when she was going into her freshman year of college at Oklahoma State University. Her witty personality, her contagious smile are just two of the many reasons why I adore her. She is bright, beautiful, talented, and an award-winning writer. She holds a spot in the Oklahoma Journalism Hall of Fame. During our conversation, she shares more about how she got into writing, her career trajectory, and the importance of mentorship. She also shares a little about being diagnosed a little later in life as being hard of hearing in an effort to raise some awareness in this area. You'll also hear what prompted her and her husband to let the lease expire on their home and be nomadic for 15 months. So she shares a little about her travel adventures, working from the road, and how that impacted their lives, and also up to where she is now. So stick around for this mini master class with Byrne Allen. Welcome, Barbara. Okay, this is a huge treat for me to be able.
And for me.
Thank you. To be talking to you. This is something that I have been looking forward to. We were sorority sisters at Oklahoma State University.
Well, people should know how much I adore you because when I went through the recruitment process, Nancy was my Rokai, which was at that time the counselor, and it was a secret. I didn't know what sorority she was in. And so when I found out that I was going to be in the same sorority as Nancy, I just about lost my mind. I was like, if this whole place is as cool as she is, oh my gosh, I am in for a treat. But I was so jazzed. So you have the disadvantage here because, you know, like when you have somebody that's older than you in school, and they're not really older than you, you know, they're like 2 or 3 years older, but like for the rest of your life, you like look up for them. You were like the senior when I was a freshman, so you'll always be in this vaunted position up here. So you should know that going into it.
Thank you.
It was that was a really, I was telling that story last night to my family about when I told them I was going to meet you, about how cool it was when we had the big reveal. Yeah,
and it's funny. Now I wish we were videoing because you were showing like my shirt. I was pulling up my shirt. So what we did, Julie and I, who are the two rush counselors, got to reveal. We had our sorority shirts underneath our Panhellenic shirts, and so I remember looking at you when I pulled that off and thinking, what is she? Because I was so excited. I knew you were going to go Kaio. And so anyway.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun. I do remember there being eye contact, but I thought surely I just made that up.
Nope. I looked, and I remember your face. Exactly. It's like I can remember it right now. And it was exciting.
It was a really special time and place, I think. For me, it was really formative. We can talk about that later if we want.
Okay. Yes.
But you're going to ask questions about this. I'm really grateful to women like you who saw something in me, encouraged me. If we get to it, we'll talk about, you know, the college years are so formative, or your youthful adolescence, you know, for people who can't do the traditional four-year college, and how important it is to have mentors. That's one of my central focuses of things that I try to teach. It's so important to have mentors, big and small. You know, every day you should be looking to help one person out.
Okay, you know.
I have some family members who are like high-ranking members, it sounds like it's Congress, who are in the recovery community and who have been members of AA for years. And one of the things that they advise in AA is if you see someone who has what you want, go talk to them. how do I get where you are? And I actually use a lot of AA teachings and like my lessons and things like that, because some of the stuff is very beautifully written. It's very profound. It's from people who are, who have had a life-changing experience. So it's my pro tip for all you people looking for some fresh reading, and so there's lots of great tips like that just for life within some recovery materials. And I've always loved that. When you see a person with what you want, go ask them how they got it.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I love that. So anyway, okay, we're gonna move on because I love those tips. Okay. So something that I wanted to talk to you about, because I noticed when I was researching you to have this interview, you started writing at a young age and were encouraged at a young age.
Yes.
And so I wanted to find out about the impact that had on you. If you could tell me kind of what that meant and who were your encouragers.
So this is all credit to my mom and to my dad as well, and to their families. When I think about starting out, I have several young nieces, and they're all right now from ages they're almost all teenagers, 6 of them.
Wow. And
we were talking about how at 15, you're really concerned with 2 identities. You're concerned with the identity you have right at this moment. Second to second. What do my friends think about me? What am I seeing on social? The pressure to do the right thing that's happening in your teenage community. And then there's also this creeping pressure of what am I going to do forever? Who am I going to be when I grow up? What's my profession going to be? How am I going to spend the rest of my life? And for me, I had really nurturing, responsible parents. My mom was a stay-at-home mom pretty early on. She later went to work after we went to school. But one of her activities that I now recognize, having children myself, was probably more for her sanity, along with keeping us educated, is we spent a lot of time at the library. We made friends with the librarians, and this was at the downtown Tulsa library, and we'd go down there at least weekly, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. And, for a mom, it's great because you can kind of set your kids loose in the children's section, and it's a relatively safe place. And what are you doing? You're exposing them to all sorts of different books, and even people who sometimes are confronted with the kid brings up a book about something that maybe a parent's uncomfortable with. I was super into paranormal activity, and my mom was always like, another ghost book? Okay. But she would encourage my reading habit, and anybody who's a successful writer will tell you then there's 2 things to be a successful writer. It's read, and write. So I was an early avid reader, to the point where my mom sometimes had to come say, you should go outside today. You can't just lay in bed and read all day. But I just couldn't get enough of it. And at some point, she also began to point out that I was a good writer. I think in about 6th grade, she would comment on school assignments or journal entries that I shared with her. She would say, you're really talented at this. She didn't put any pressure on me to be a writer or to do that, but just to have going back to my, little nieces, at some point when parents plant those positive seeds, I think they really stick. So I think back, I thought about that a lot. I had to do a video for the presentation at the awards ceremony, and I thought, it's hard to make a case that it was really anybody besides my mom until high school. And when I got into high school and I started thinking maybe I am good at writing, I went to Booker T. Washington. Thank you. Yay. 30-year reunion this weekend. I had some really incredible teachers who I will now name check because the world needs to know who they are. Susan Gromberg, Mike Kemry, and I can't remember, Helen Orm, I think was her name. And they were faculty. They were college professors. They were so into literature and writing and elevating voice, and it was just an incredible experience. And so I had these great writing teachers that when I got to Oklahoma State, I was in really great shape, and I found the student newspaper. Going to college and figuring out what I was going to do is kind of a funny aside, but
share that. Will you share that? Because I want to hear about even how you got into writing and what you enjoy about writing.
Okay. When I went to Oklahoma State, I was privileged to go to a really outstanding high school here in Tulsa, Booker T. Washington, and one of the courses that they offered at that time, and I don't know if they still do or not, was AP Marine Biology. Can you believe that? And we would go every year. We would study the ocean all year. This would be such a great class now with climate change and things like that. So we'd study the ecosystem, the ocean, estuaries, how life, evolves in the ocean. And then our teacher had worked out a deal with, I'm pretty sure, because I drove past it, I'm pretty sure it was Florida State University, had a wet lab, is what they call it. It's an on-ocean lab. in Apalachicola Bay in Florida, and we would go down for a week. She would take the whole class to live on the little dorm that they had on this beach and study in their lab. And we would go out in their boat, and we would like do collections from the ocean, and we would come back and examine them. I mean, I was like, oh my God, I got to be a marine biologist. I mean, I have to. This is like the greatest thing I've ever done. Of course, I go to Oklahoma State. It's just a cattle call. You're just standing in line trying to figure out where you're going to go. And I go up to this woman, and I was like, all right, next, what's your name? Who do you want to be? What do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm like, I want to be a marine biologist. And I'll never forget. She was like, we don't have that. I just was like, oh, my soul is crushed. How will I live on the beach and swim among the crustaceans? She goes, what else do you like? And I was like, my mom says I'm a good writer. And at that point, the conversations with my mom were, you could be an English teacher. And I thought, well, I can't do that. Because then, of course, now I've transitioned to whatever my parents want. I can't, give them that. Mm-hmm. And so they suggested that. The counselor suggested, well, do you want to do, like, English? And I was like, what else do you have? And she was like, well, you could do journalism. And I was like, how much math is involved in that? And they were like, one course. And I was like, okay, I'll be a journalism major. And I swear to you, literally, that is how I ended up in this career. Some random counselor, given that I had an interest in writing, just suggested journalism because I didn't want to take any more math classes, and that's how I ended up covering the Oklahoma City bombing.
Well, you have to love it, though. I mean, you can't. Even when you get my degree's in accounting, so you do have to enjoy what you're doing to be. And we're going to talk about this, to be good at it, and you're very good at it because you received a big accolade that we're going to talk about. But that's amazing. I didn't know that story. And I always knew how active you were with the O'Colly, which was the OSU student newspaper. Yeah. And you did such a good job writing. And I would pick up the O'Colly and be walking to class holding it, reading a physical newspaper, reading what you had written, and you were very good at it. So, I could see that talent early on, but to take that and continue on, because your trajectory, if you want to talk about that a little bit, from OSU, I think you went to the Tulsa World. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, anybody out there that's thinking about journalism, a real key for a lot of students was working at campus newspaper, which is a fascinating infrastructure that we have in this country, which is, of course, built on the concepts of free speech and a free press. And they really just let the students at most college newspapers, they just run with it. Mm-hmm. And because the school doesn't want to get in legal trouble for what the students might print, they're editorially independent. So when we do something really dumb and we have a misspelled headline and someone calls and complains, the president gets to say, that's a learning lab. It's independent of the university. Please direct your complaints at the editor-in-chief, who at one point was 20-year-old, Barbara Byrne. So after it was a great experience, and it really helped you. It kind of helped you smooth those rough edges off. I made a lot of my mistakes in college. Famous, don't we all? So by the time I got to work at my hometown paper, which was the Tulsa World, which is an excellent newspaper, especially at the time, and I was lucky enough to work with, when I was there, my editors were people who are now the investigations editor at the Washington Post, a senior editor at ProPublica, people who are civil rights advocates. Wow. I mean, it was again, I just got lucky with the people that I worked for and the time that I was there. It was just really fortuitous. Right after I got to Tulsa, this is germane to the whole path. Right after I got to Tulsa, I was connected with a group of students who were working at Tulsa People to create a teen magazine. A gentleman who was a longtime Tulsan and a former scoutmaster had retired from ONG, and he wanted to, in his retirement, do some volunteer work. So his choice was to teach communications, and he thought that it would be cool to get a group of kids together to create their own teen magazine. And he was friends with the publisher of Tulsa People, who allowed him the privilege of once a quarter donating some paper and space. And so the students from all different high schools would come in and write articles and take pictures, and they would publish this magazine. That gentleman died suddenly right after I got the job at the Tulsa World. And so I stepped in and started volunteering with the students. And I think that was sort of a partnership between the publisher of Tulsa People and this gentleman. And after the gentleman passed away, I think that Tulsa People lost its appetite for, supporting that, which is totally understandable. So another pro tip. So in desperation to help these students out, because they were very invested as teenagers tend to be, in something that they loved. So I went to the Tulsa World and I said, I have this group of kids. Is there any chance we could let them, call in sports reports or just do something to involve them in the media ecosystem? We're here. We've got them on the hook. And I'll never forget my editor at the time, Susan Ellerbach, was like, well, actually, we have been looking at putting something together for teenagers. And so, great privilege of my professional career. I spent 10 years at the Tulsa World working with high school students. We had a section called Satellite, and they would come in and they would write stories and take photos and write columns. And it was my job to teach them how to do responsible journalism, how to report on their community, and to tell readers what was going on in their high schools. Parents were very curious. This is what my kid's telling me at the dinner table, what's really going on. We had one story that we scooped Time Magazine on. We were very early to adopters of the internet. So we were seeing things online. And I don't know if you'll remember, in the early 2000s, there were websites that you could go to that would teach you how to be anorexic and bulimic. And my students came to me and were like, hey, we need to write about this. This is like blowing up. And Time Magazine had it on its cover the next week. Now, I don't know that they subscribe to the Tulsa World, but I like to think, is the way that journalists are. We circulate stuff. So we did we talked about students who had died. We talked about students who were paraplegic. We weren't just like fluffy, here's the football scores. We really taught them. There were some fluffy stories for sure, some fun stories. That was my introduction into like journalism education and how teaching students fundamentals of, again, free speech, your rights as a citizen, what it means to have a free press, and to just teach them, like, take a camera and a microphone and go out into your community and go find a story and share it with other people. That became like the central focus of like what fulfills me. Is like giving people that. From the Tulsa World, I then went to Oklahoma State, my alma mater, and I was able to serve as the advisor to the OCOLI, which was a great privilege. So while they had editorial independence and the students could do whatever they want, they would come to me and say, is this a good idea or is this not a good idea? And we would talk through it. I never told them what to do. I just helped them work through what might happen if you do this, what might happen if you do that. And then after that, I ended up going to the Poynter Institute, which is a really well-respected, renowned journalism institute. I can't believe that they brought me on. I was so thrilled. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is like the chance of a lifetime. So now I'm getting to do this sort of education thing on a national level, where I'm creating content for journalism professors and college students and student media. So that's where I am now.
Wow. Okay. That's awesome. Okay, so your background in journalism, I don't know if you have a class in asking questions or formulating questions and interviewing people, because I never got that class.
Right.
And so I am curious about questions, because you really do a good job knowing the right questions to ask and how to get a good story because of the questions that you ask. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
You and I were talking earlier about interview skills, and I always thought that one of the things that I did well in journalism was interview people.
Yeah.
People seemed to respond well to me, and I was like, well, maybe this is a skill set.
Yes.
About 17 years ago, my sister had a baby. And when the baby was about 3 years old, my little niece, we realized she was hard of hearing.
Okay.
And she got checked, and she has some pretty severe hearing loss, and she wears hearing aids. She's excelling. I mean, she's straight A student. She's fantastic. She's overcome any sort of impediment that was put in her way. Mm-hmm. But my sister said to me when we found out about my niece, she said, I really wish you would get your hearing checked, because you do a lot of the same things that my daughter does. I have a hard time getting your attention. Sometimes you interrupt me. And I was just like, so I went in to get my hearing checked. And it's free. You can go to one of these hearing aid clinics because they want to sell you a hearing aid. And so they'll do a hearing check. And sure enough, I have a pretty serious hearing loss that I was diagnosed with at age 35. So if you've experienced hearing loss, you don't realize that everybody else isn't hearing like you. You just assume that everyone else hears at the same level. And I came out of the booth. The woman said, I'm going to show you your results, but I want to show you something first. So I was facing a wall. And the tech she said, I'm going to put some test hearing aids on you just to kind of show you what it's like, what you would hear like if you had hearing aids. And she put them in my ears, and she stood behind me, and she said, can you hear me? And I physically turned to see what she was saying, even though now I could hear her very clearly, because I realized, and she confirmed, that I stare at people, I read their lips to make sure that what I'm hearing is communicated the same way out of their lips. And I was like kind of blown away. And I was like, oh my gosh. And she was like, you have a mild to moderate loss and you probably need hearing aids. And I was like, she said, see how you're leaning in and reading my lips? And I said, I thought I was a good interviewer. And she said, oh, you're probably just trying to read lips. And I was like, dang it.
No, we know you're a good interviewer. We know you're a good interviewer.
Yeah. So now I get to be a disability advocate as well. And it really helped me understand more, to think more about what people were going through who weren't just like me, you know?
Yeah.
And that's been another process through life, is being willing to say, like, my experience wasn't what other people's are, and I should be sensitive to that.
Okay. I thank you for sharing that, because we do know that you're a good interviewer. One thing I want to talk about is you being inducted into the Oklahoma Journalism Hall of Fame. I know it's probably a huge honor to you, and it being at such a young age to receive that, because in my mind I'm thinking Hall of Fame people are like older, so much older. So you've done some things to get yourself to that point. So if you can tell me about what that meant to you.
Well, I'm very honored to be in that class of people. There's some really incredible people in there. On the other hand, I'm not one to toot my own horn, so it's still kind of hard to hear. I'm like, yes, that happened. Okay.
Gosh, it's amazing.
One of the things that I tell my students, in contrast to YOLO, life is so long. And you just never know who you are going to run into 30 years after you graduate from college and really like somebody who was your rush counselor. You don't know that your first editor at your paper that you were terrified of will be dead by the time you're 40. You don't realize that the person who's kind of suggesting that maybe you should do more work is going to end up being one of the nation's top, leaders in their field. And so I try to look back at how I would get, this is kind of a weird way to look at it, but like the takeaway for me was there was so many times in my life where I felt like I wasn't good enough, or I was inadequate, or I was never going to get where I wanted to be. You don't have a sense when you're 20, 25, I think even 30, of how much time you really have to make an impact and do good things, And every day is a gift, but cumulatively, those days add up. And so for me, it was really neat to be like, okay, woof, that imposter syndrome thing. Maybe I didn't really have that. Maybe I really do deserve to be, among people who are really revered and really important in this field, especially as, frankly now, Oklahoma is becoming one of the places that we call a news desert, where there's fewer and fewer journalists, there's fewer and fewer reliable sources of information from vetted journalists who know ethics, who know, who have experience, who know how to handle tough situations, who can be nuanced on the air. And so it was a really big honor.
So what do you attribute getting that award to? Is it the hard work, the research, particular stories that you had an angle that was a little more innovative or,
Sure.
out of the box?
I think for me, it was two things. I think that I earned the respect of Oklahoma journalists because I worked really hard to, I absolutely don't want to take credit for their success at all, but I really tried hard with my students at Oklahoma State to round out those rough edges and make sure that they understood that they were always a representation of their media organization, their university, their employer cares what they do. And so my goal was to turn out respectful, honest, ethical workers. And I think I began to get a reputation after several years of kids coming out of Oklahoma State journalism program are really solid students who are worth hiring. And that probably more than anything helped elevate my profile among my colleagues. It's very easy to go to university and sort of disappear into research and, you in your class and things like that. And so for me, it was really important for the generations of students who come after to say, you can trust an Oklahoma State journalist, you can trust that they're going to show up, do what they say, show up on time, do what they're supposed to, that sort of thing. And I also want to say, the Poynter Institute is really, it's almost 50 years old. It's really a nationally renowned organization. I still kind of can't believe I work there because it is so revered among journalists for its training. It has a beautiful glass and wood building on the bay in St. Petersburg, Florida. People come there for training, and it becomes like a retreat, like a vacation, even though it's professional. So it's professional development, but it is not a hotel ballroom. That is, we pride ourselves on, we call it Poynter Magic. We pride ourselves on creating a space and a place for people to recharge, get great information, and go back and serve their communities, because that's what we really believe in. Mm-hmm. And the media ecosystem right now is really fractured. There's an enormous amount of mis and disinformation. We're lowering standards on who we're hiring because we want to take people who will take less money. Mm-hmm. And so it's so important to us that we keep standards high, that we teach people how to do good journalism, but doing good journalism is all about serving communities. Mm-hmm. Hard stop. Mm-hmm. It's not about ratings. It's not about winning awards. It's about making sure that people are safe, that they have access to the information they need to raise their kids in a safe environment. So I think it was cool. I think the people that run the Oklahoma Journalism Hall of Fame were like, hey, we got somebody working at Poynter now. And I think that helped as well, because it's really respected among journalists.
Okay. Yeah, it's amazing and so cool. Mm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I am interested in your advice about people who are considering a career in journalism.
I like to be very clear that a career in journalism is typically not a well-paying career. It's on par with teachers. It's people who are doing important work, who are misunderstood and often undervalued. But it's a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. You're going out, you're talking to different people. One day I interviewed the president of BOK. And then I also went and did sort of like I interviewed a family that was like, the Tulsa World does an annual fundraiser to raise funds for families that are impoverished. And, these are the people, I'm running the gamut. I'm talking to people who live in a house on the hill. I'm talking to people who live at the very bottom of the hill. And they all have interesting stories. I have so many friends who have great anecdotes about just impact that their stories and their reporting have had. I have a friend who got a law passed in the state legislature to improve mental health for Oklahomans. So it's a varied career. You can do a lot of different things with it. You can be on the air. You can write stories. You can be a producer, making this stuff come to life. You can be an editor of words. You can be an editor of sound. You can be an editor of pictures. Mm-hmm. But regardless, it typically is a great education, because what I tell people is it teaches you how to communicate effectively. It makes you a good writer. Makes you think about how the pictures that we show people impact them, the words impact them. And it teaches you the importance of deadlines. And there's not a single job, even if you majored in journalism and then went to medical school, you're a good writer. We have a ton of people who get a journalism degree and then go to law school, because it's such a great foundation in communications and, meeting deadlines, making your court filings on time, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have had a lot of success. Would you agree?
Being a journalist is about making sure you're not part of the story, telling other people's stories, platforming and elevating other people. Mm-hmm. And then I always try to teach my students the same thing. You've got to retain a sense of humility about yourself, your work, what you know and what you don't know. Yeah. So yes, it's great. I'm successful.
Yeah.
There, I said it.
Yeah. Good for you. So let me ask, because I feel like I knew you at a stage, and this is such a different stage than where you are now. So I knew you at the kind of the beginning of you deciding your career, writing, doing a great job with the Ocali, and now here you are, now a Hall of Fame member in the Oklahoma Journalism Hall of Fame. So if you could kind of just tell me what you think of that and maybe how you define success. If you're saying, do you think you've made it? Like, where are you at this point in your career?
Well, it's funny. When the pandemic happened, I was living in Florida. The Poynter Institute is in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is a travel pitch, is an incredible city that is soon going to be overrun. If you can travel to St. Petersburg, Florida in the next 2 years, do it. It's unbelievable. The art scene, the beautiful beaches, great. So we were living there. We took the pandemic pretty seriously. My husband's a little bit older than me, and we really didn't go out much. And it really provided us a time to inventory what was important. And so one of the things that we did after the pandemic ended, I still kind of can't believe we did this, We let our lease expire on the place we were living in Florida. I told my employer that I was going to be fully remote and I was going to move away. And they were like, okay, they were adapting the new sort of remote thinking, and they were like, well, where are you going to go? And I was like, well, first we're going to drive around for a while. My boss was like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, we're going to go nomadic. We're going to go drive around the country. And we drove around the country for 15 months after the pandemic. So in May 2021, after we were both fully vaccinated, we started packing up all our belongings, which we had downsized quite a bit to move to Florida because our kids were grown. And we essentially packed a U-Haul full of what was left, drove here to Tulsa, rented a storage space, put everything in a lovely little air-conditioned storage space, and spent the next 15 months driving around. We afforded it by sometimes staying with family, sometimes staying at like an Airbnb or a hotel. So we kind of split 50-50 because we weren't paying rent anymore. We didn't have a mortgage. And so that enabled us to take that money and spend it on housing all across the country, wherever we wanted to. We made a list. He and I took to go back to sort of a sorority thing. We took 20 index cards and we wrote the name of a place that each of us had always wanted to visit, but we hadn't made the time. We didn't have the wherewithal. We hadn't made the time. And then we put them in order and we flipped them over. So here's my number 1 place to go. Here's my number 2 place. And it was really neat how many of them lined up and how many of them were a surprise to each other, because I'm very fortunate. The pandemic offered me an opportunity to spend a lot of time with my husband, and it was a lot. The kids are gone. We had not moved to Florida that long ago. He's a musician, so that was live music was not happening. Yeah. And so it really forced us to kind of come together, deal with some issues, and also get closer. And he came up with this idea. He's like, I never thought you'd go for this. And I was like, again, life is short, life is long. Let's go make some memories. So we, national parks, people we wanted to visit, and so we drove all over. And I think we didn't, we live pretty frugally. I think sometimes our anxieties drive so much of what we're doing. Mm-hmm. We're nervous about so much in life all the time. We're nervous about everything from, when you lay your head at night, did I remember to lock the door? Did I put the dog out? Is the light on? Did I start the coffee machine? Whatever. We have all these worries. And then the next morning, the first thing you're thinking about is all the things you have to do today. And at some point that begins to feel, when you start identifying it as I'm filling my life with have-tos and worries instead of get-tos and I guess just get-tos. I felt like I wasn't as excited. I always tell people you should have something to look forward to all the time, whatever it is. Even if it's, I'm going to a movie this weekend or I have a huge cruise in 2 years. You always need to have something to look forward to. And I've really tried to adopt that mindset. And when I find myself kind of anguishing about the day-to-day, I'm like, there's no rule that says your house has to be clean when your friend come over. That's just what you've been telling yourself for years. What happens if you let that go? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you have to. Go ahead and clean up. But just those little mental exercises, what happens when I let that go? Mm-hmm. So between the pandemic and this trip and, what you were saying, have I been a success? Have I made it? I have really tried to dial back the professional parts of me. Because I will say, as much as I have loved the media industry and journalism and things like this, now that I am at this sort of higher level where we're looking at things on a national level, that the 6 o'clock news starts at 6, we have to get it right, you can't misspell somebody's name, that high anxiety environment really bleeds over into your personal life. Mm-hmm. And so I have tried more and more to separate those two, to say, I'm doing things right now that I do as a professional in my personal life. I need to stop doing that. There's no deadline on getting dinner on the table or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm successful in my personal life and that I've kind of tried to identify my anxiety. And I don't think it's a clinical thing. I think it's just a human thing. Mm-hmm. Oof, this is making me nervous, or this is giving me worry. So maybe we won't even label it anxiety. Let's call it low-key worry. Mm-hmm. So I guess I feel successful in the sense that I'm managing my personal life and my professional life. I think this is where I could really go long. After the trip around the world. We did not go around the world. We only went around the country. We settled in Los Angeles for a variety of reasons. My husband's a musician and the opportunities are there for him. He has supported me for the last 17 years. I don't want to leave him out of this. He has moved to 3 different cities with me to support my career. And I just really felt like if I could be a remote worker, he's always wanted to be part of the music scene in Los Angeles. Let's do it. I have totally fallen in love with the city. It is gritty, it is dirty, it is beautiful, it is expensive, it is interesting, and it is a far, far cry from Oklahoma. And one of my goals was to push myself and be around people who weren't like me, who didn't look like me, who don't talk like me, because I find that for every issue that people get divided on, they start to get better informed and mellow a little bit about their stances when you meet someone and spend time with someone who's different than you. And so one of my goals was to do that, to live in an environment that wasn't where I had been living, which was in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, which was wonderful. But I've done that now. And so now I'm going to go live in a 1-bedroom apartment in, a hipster part of Los Angeles. But it's been really good for me to see how a lot of the world lives. So I would just say the opportunities that you have to, diversify your social portfolio, take them, go to a deaf church, see what it's like. Volunteer at an interfaith day, whatever, race or creed or religion you are, make a point to strike up a conversation with someone that isn't of the same race or religion. I think that you get smarter when you're with people that you don't know anything about. And so there's this instinct to be like, I don't really know anything about, that nice woman is wearing a headscarf. She's probably Muslim. I don't really know anything about, maybe I say something that offend her or something. So I'm going to kind of put her on a shelf and not bother her or not talk to her or whatever because I don't understand her. And I think we should be doing the total opposite because, knowledge is power. And so let's, I don't like to use the word ignorant, but literally there are things that I'm ignorant about that I want to get better at. So is that successful? I mean, I feel better, about the way my brain works at 48 than I did at 28, 22.
Well, I was going to ask what your biggest takeaway from that travel experience would be.
People are fundamentally really nice all over. I mean, people are kind everywhere. And interesting.
So let me ask, I'm genuinely curious about this. What would you say your superpower is?
Well, if I were to admit I had a superpower, I would say that I like to create magical spaces. I want to create a space where people can be free to be themselves and pursue creative and academic pursuits with the help of a mentor. So when you have a young person who is struggling with an assignment or a writing project or even video editing, being able to sit down with that person and say, okay, what have you got? Where do you want to go? How do we get there? And instead of telling them how to do it, getting them to tell you how to do it. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you tried this? And that moment where they sort of they take that leap and they realize they can do it, whether that happens one-on-one or in a classroom discussion where all of a sudden, the oxygen kind of leaves the room and you realize that everybody's really focused on this moment of learning or understanding. I feel like my superpower is trying to create those spaces and never ever tell people how to get there, but move them ahead. And if you can move them ahead in that moment and you just give them a little bit of confidence that they can do something that they previously maybe thought they couldn't, that pays enormous dividends forever. Are they going to remember that moment? Probably not. And they probably have a totally different interpretation of it. But for me, that's where real growth happens. And that's what I really like to try to sparking magic, creating magical spaces and cultures. That's what I hope my legacy or my superpower is.
How cool. Okay, I love that. Okay, so a couple of things just kind of in wrapping up. Okay, one thing, I'm going to ask you about this because I don't want to not ask you a hard question. I want to talk about a struggle that you've had to overcome or an obstacle. So if you can talk about something where you have learned a valuable lesson that you would like to pass along through something where you've grown because of it.
I would like to start by saying tenacity is a core value. I just don't take no for an answer. I just don't respond well when people say no. I think there's got to be another way. Whatever it is.
I'm the same. Mm-hmm.
There is a way to get what you want and to make it happen. Mm-hmm. Probably I have bordered on the point of obnoxiousness about this around a few things. I credit that to my parents, who raised me in a very nurturing environment. My mom was not my best friend. She is not my best friend. She was my mom. Now, my daughter and I, we're like best friends, of course. Like, that's the goal. But my mother made sure I had an excellent, enriched childhood. She told me every day that I was pretty. She was like, you look really pretty today. Let's be real honest. I think I look great. Is that because my mom told me that, or because I really look great? It doesn't matter. I just got in an argument with this, not an argument, but a discussion with my friend who has a 4-year-old. And I said, are you telling her every day she's pretty? And I'm like, no, I'm telling her she's smart and she's good at math and things like that. I'm like, that's great. The world that we live in values beauty. So why don't you just throw in pretty on top of that? So that's my advice that's my pushback to all the people who are saying you shouldn't tell your girls they're pretty. Feel free to tell them both you're pretty and you're smart. This is a very hot take that I've just come up with here live.
Good. I love it.
It really helps. If feeling good about yourself physically is a game changer. Mm-hmm. So no matter what your kids look like, tell them every single day how handsome they are, how pretty they are, how bright they are. Every day. Find a way. As they walk out the door to school, they will not remember that you're doing it every day until they're my age. So I feel like it's hard for me to think about like a struggle, because I like a struggle. I like a challenge. I like being told no because it gives me something to do. Back to the anxiety. If I have something that I know is going to be difficult, that gives me work. It gives me a way to occupy my time. So I'm thinking really hard about a struggle that I've had. I would say that going to grad school and having to write a thesis was very difficult because I did not understand what I was doing. And I felt ignorant and I really didn't like it. So more than feeling like I couldn't do it, I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And that was really frustrating. I remember crying to my husband about that and being like, oh my God, she's crying about something, that's not a movie. Because I'm not a freak out and cry person. I didn't know what a thesis was. I didn't understand that. It took a really long time for me to figure that out. That's a kind of a boring example.
I like your approach to that. The reason why I ask that question is because that shuts a lot of people down. Mm-hmm. Hearing no, mm-hmm. getting a rejection, no, you can't have my time, I won't give you that story, I won't whatever. And that shuts a lot of people down. And I like your approach, thinking, what else can I do? Not taking no for an answer and thinking about how you can make it happen. I'll give you an actual good example. And this is pretty, I would say this is in the category of vulnerable and authenticity, which I think all women should strive to be more mm-hmm. around their peer group, especially. Mm-hmm. I got divorced when my daughter was 2 years old. And, had I had some girlfriends that no offense to my girlfriends at the time, love you guys, you're all wonderful. I just didn't feel like I could talk to people about what was really going on in my house because it was a sign of failure. My marriage was struggling. I must be doing something wrong. And that was a struggle. And I do think that you need to find people in your life. It doesn't have to be everybody. It doesn't have to be dirty laundry, but you gotta find some friends out there that you can be real with and test. Be a little real, and if they respond well, then know that you've got a real solid gold friend there. But when my daughter was 16, well, she was 15, she wanted to move out of Stillwater and go live with her dad here in Tulsa. And I just fought for that not to happen. And I lost, and she left. In part because I finally just relented. So imagine of all the things that you're tenacious, you don't want this to happen. This is my only child at home still. My older kids were stepkids and they had already gone off. And so suddenly at age, I don't know how old would I have been then, late 30s, all of a sudden my daughter is like, I don't like you. I don't like your rules. I'm going to go live with dad. No. I lose this fight. And that was so humbling and so humiliating and so difficult. And how many times did I cry about that? And what happened as a result of that awful struggle? My daughter goes to live with her dad, who's a wonderful person, but runs a busy law practice and lives in a really cool apartment downtown. But guess what? It's in a school that she wasn't anticipating going to. So she ends up at a strange high school her junior year.
She doesn't know anybody. She is lonely for the first time in her life. She's not surrounded by all her Stillwater buddies. And her dad's really busy. And all of a sudden, maybe my mom isn't so nuts. Maybe my mom was hard on me for a reason. Hard on me. I'm using air quotes because, you know, all parents can relate to you're just being hard on me when I'm just trying to, like, raise you up right. And the result was it brought us incredibly close together. And almost immediately, she would come home every weekend. You know, she couldn't wait to come back to mom. And so sometimes the things that you're fighting turn out to be, in a weird way, blessings. That's not my favorite story. I'm not thrilled that happened, but I see how much growth it allowed both of us. And so that was something that if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have fought her. I wouldn't have had the big blow-up fights about that complicated her relationship with me and her dad, you know, that we had worked really hard to cultivate, you know, a friendly relationship. And so I would just say, you know, sometimes you lose and it turns out to really be a win. You just don't know it at the time.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. This has been such a treat.
Well, thank
you.
And
so much fun just hearing some different stories that you've had to share. So I appreciate you so much talking to me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to just get to sit down with you and talk about myself.
I know.
It's fun to talk about yourself and we don't do it enough.
Well, I know that you're being facetious, but it's you're always on the other side interviewing people. So I appreciate you being on, you know, being willing to talk to us and let us learn, you know, more about you and opening up so much. So again, thank you.
You are welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, everybody, that's a wrap on this week's episode. I want to thank you for listening to the Sharing Passion and Purpose podcast. It means the world to me, and I'd love to connect with you. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Sharing Passion and Purpose, and Twitter at Passion Sharing. Also, if you like this podcast, it would mean a lot to me for you to subscribe, rate, and review it. And as always, all my show notes will be available on my website, sharingpassionandpurpose.com.